Today's focus is actually going to be on something a little bit different than what I normally talk about. We're going to be talking about monitoring and the wonderful world of Windows Azure. All right. So first off, Azure is one of those cloudy things. Everybody's probably well aware of this. So as an example, raise your hands if you feel that it is a truthful statement to say that if Microsoft made a drinking game out of every time they use the word cloud, the entire IT infrastructure for the world would pretty much be drunk. Does anybody disagree with that? Raise your hand if you want to fight against that. All right, everybody's the same page on this. That is one of those words that it is almost like the death knells for most presentations nowadays to walk up and go, I'm going to talk about cloud. You know, it's kind of painful, but I'm actually excited about what we're going to talk about today because I believe it has real importance and real potential to it. That's what we're going to talk about. So, our agenda. We're going to start with what is Azure and why should we care? You know, why is this important to us? We're going to talk about Microsoft and monitoring in general in terms of what monitoring is. And monitoring isn't necessarily System Center Operations Manager. That's not necessarily going to be what we're going to talk about. We'll do some of that, but the reality is monitoring is more than that nowadays. We're going to talk about monitoring in Azure itself, and then we're going to go into monitoring in Operations Manager, and then we're going to throw kind of a thought at futures, where this is going, kind of making some extractions based on what we've seen so far. All right, so question number one, why is Azure and why should we care? All right, point number one, it depends on what is Azure. Hold on a minute. Dang it. My PowerPoint presentation is failing me. No one saw that. Okay. All right. So, PowerPoint presentation put together this week, as you all can tell. It's called Just-in-Time Presentation Skills. All right. So why should we care? Most likely, if you all down there, like me, don't care about the private cloud, most likely your boss is going to care. I don't know if your boss is this dude, potentially this dude, or if you're one of the lucky few out there, this dude. All right, I happen to be none of the three of those. I actually had a picture of my boss Syed in there at one point in time. He didn't appreciate it as much. I told that something about a review. So, all right, defining what Azure is where I want to start as a starting point here. I'm going to start with what it is kind of depends on how you see it. So first off, Azure can very well be the development platform of the future. When you talk to, one of our guys in Dallas, a guy by the name of Tony Wynn, as soon as Azure started releasing, he started pulling me into a conference room and he annoyed me for an hour plus trying to explain to me why this is going to be the biggest thing on the whole planet, why we should care and the rest of it. And by the time he finished that, I actually began to care just a tiny bit as a result. Developers really dig this. Let me give you an example of a good example of where you can use Azure. So we've got a client in Dallas where they own a product that the application cannot be run in the United States of America. There's restrictions, there's legal restrictions associated with it, copyrights, trademarks, whatever the heck it is. For some reason, they can't run it in the US. So what they chose to do is they wrote the whole thing and they're running it in an Azure data center in Germany right now. So they're using Azure to be able to fill that gap because they can't run it here in the United States. That's just one good example. From an IT pro perspective, though, this can very well be the next access database of the future, or the next generation non-IT built stealth application, as I'm going to call it. Okay. And by the way, I know we got a couple Microsoft guys in the room, I think. So, but I'm not Microsoft, so if I say anything offensive, y'all please feel free to point it out. But I'm trying to be completely transparent of what my thoughts are on this. This is kind of a tough one because what can happen now, and I've seen this in some companies already, is people will start spinning up Azure applications around IT. Okay, now back in the olden days when we started doing this, that would happen with Access, right? Access databases, the whole thing's running under people's desks and the rest of it, right? In some ways, Azure has now become the next generation of those Access databases because they don't have to have IT to spin this stuff up. As long as they've got connectivity, they can actually stealth app these things out, and the next thing you know, you've got an Azure production application running that you didn't even know was getting developed. So we have to be able to think about how do we approach this? How do we try to stop it, or do we embrace it? How do we use it, and where do we go? The paradigm shift is beginning to move significantly from your locally controlled data centers up to your regionally based providers. Okay, now this is my definition, not Microsoft's. The point here is it becomes less and less important about where something is running and more important about the fact that it is running at any one point in time. Okay? Right now, we're very tied into the concept of having our own data centers. Love it, you know. For if you go back a little ways, when I started in IT as an example, we had a bunch of servers. We would buy physical hardware. How many people remember buying physical hardware for every single app you're going to do? Okay, we'll start that product. We'll start that project in a couple of months because we're going to acquire some hardware, get some operating systems on it, roll with it, right? All of us know this has changed. This is adaptive now. Okay, now we have large virtualization farms. We buy enough capacity that we can go ahead and pull those together and we can provision them far more quickly. All right. So what we took as business as usual was the fact that you're going to buy physical servers and you're going to go through this process. We're going to tie them together. Well, what's happened in essence now is through the Azure pieces of this, that's the next generation of this whole virtualization concept. It's taking what we've done with virtualizing an individual server, and now we're taking it to an application and we're scaling it globally around the entire planet. So that's why this starts becoming really, really interesting. Now, one of the things that's confusing about Azure, in my opinion, is that it means almost everything. It's PaaS, it's SaaS, it's IaaS, it's whatever other four-letter acronyms you can happen to throw at it today. But the two that we're going to focus on is applications in the cloud and virtual machines in the cloud. All right. So your applications in the cloud. Here's how I differentiate these. Your applications in the cloud, in essence, you're defining how the service is going to work. How many is it going to scale up to? Where's it going to run? How's it going to come together, and all the rest of it? And you hand it off to Microsoft. You don't know what servers it's running on. You don't know what storage it's running on. All you know is really the data centers that it happens to be running on. Now, the benefit to that is you don't have to administer that. That individual application you've got that may be spanning lots of different servers, you don't have to patch it. You don't have to, antivirus scheduling, all that type of stuff. That's all handled by Microsoft. All right. So this is where the majority of things hopefully will go in the future. We're push it out there. Applications are up there running. Life's good. The second part is virtual machines in the cloud, also known as IaaS. Okay. And again, I've been pushing against this the whole way, but I guess it makes it interesting for me also because I've been fighting this the entire way, trying to not accept this, but it is becoming reality. I accepted IaaS as a reality when the following happened. I got a notification that our MSDN subscriptions had rights to use Windows Azure, infrastructure as a service. Cool. All right. I spent less than 1 hour, logged in, activated my benefits in MSDN, connected to the portal, spun up a new virtual server, RDP'd to it and connected to it and started working with it in less than an hour. At which point in time it became readily apparent to me this is real. This is not cloud vapor and the rest of it. This is real technical pieces that are out there. So the second part of this, like what we're doing right now, we actually, at Catapult, for some of our tests, we actually took a domain controller, put it up in Azure, created a whole new Active Directory site associated with it, put the VPN tunnels in place and the rest, and now we've got a domain controller and an application running in the cloud, all within our own, effectively outside the bounds of our data center, but still running within our own Active Directory domain structure. So it is a constantly evolving framework. I'm going to talk about the goods and the bads. All right, so the goods on the constantly evolving portal framework is you're not waiting 6 months, 12 months, 18 months to be able to update a product, which is what most of us are used to on a regular basis now. What we're looking at now is constant changes. So you could log into the portal one day and it looks like this, log into the portal the next day and it looks like this. All right? That's both a good and a bad. The good is that's quick evolution. That means new functionality is being added quickly. You're getting new benefits from the rest of it. The negative being you just learned the portal the week before, and now you got to figure out how it works the week after. And you have no control in terms of when it's going to change, who's going to change it. It just happens. You log in and you go, great, time to train my users again. So I'm going to categorize this into 4 big buckets. The first, and why I'll do this is where I'm going to tie it into Operations Manager here in a bit. The first is websites, cloud services, storage, and things of that nature. The second is SQL databases. Third being virtual machines, or IaaS, as we talked about. And then the fourth is just general settings and configuration. And I've tried to litter this with actual pictures from the different UIs so you can see what you're looking at. That far right side over there, far right side over there, is actually from the Azure portal, and it shows you what the icons look like and all the rest of it. All right. So why should we care about it? Big point number 2. Microsoft is all in with Azure. If you look on the graphic that I'm showing here right now, this is from System Center Operations Manager using functionality called Global Service Monitoring. With GSM, we can take any publicly available website and we can monitor its availability from different places all around the world. Okay? So this one, as you can see, as we take a look at some of the list here, we've got Sydney, Australia, we've got Stockholm, we've got Los Angeles, Chicago, a bunch of different data centers that are out there right now. So What it's giving us, in essence, is a global view of what's out there, how your website is performing. And it can be your website running in your data center, and it could also be a website running in Azure. So yes, you can actually use Azure to monitor Azure. A little ironic as well, the mirror thing, but exactly. We'll just roll with it. We'll just roll with it and say it's probably a good thing. And the third and most important piece of this is that it's becoming to the point now where it's going to no longer be cost effective to run our own localized data centers. All right. So as an example, for Catapult internally, they ran the numbers on this to figure out what it looks like for us, and it's going to cost us 40% less to run all of our gear that we're running, all of our servers that we're doing for Catapult systems, to run them in the cloud versus running them in our on-premise data center.
Is that going to be a public case study?
No. Actually, there's a good question, though. There's a blog on that. And I can send you the blog link on it because there are the pieces of it there where you have to be careful with who's got it. Please, by the way, throw questions out at any point in time. I never said that. Go for it.
This is not a question. I did that on fourth term of master failure on the data center.
Yeah.
One of the things is, I don't think people follow this does, how much data centers cost. One of the biggest costs is the heating and cooling. And the electric it's just not the system itself, but they use as much, one data center can use as much energy as several city blocks.
Well said, and a huge point for consideration. We have to factor in power costs. We have to factor in our administrative overhead time associated with it, and who's got to go into those data centers and the rest of it. There's a lot of overhead costs associated with it. Like we're talking heating and cooling costs and the rest of it. Big, important costs and pieces on it. So good point, and thank you for pointing that out. That's well said. The thing that becomes really interesting here is I'm gonna intentionally equate this to a funny example. So let's say for a minute that you make toilet paper. Let's say you're the only vendor on the planet that makes toilet paper. All right?
Holy crap.
Yes. Well said. I don't think we got that on the recording. All right. So now you're the only vendor on the whole planet that makes toilet paper. 4 large companies have just come to you and said, we would like to buy 15, 20, whatever percentage of the total amount of toilet paper that you make in a year. All right. Now, what happens there in essence is that vendor is now going to be selling at a bulk discount what they had been selling potentially to multiple different people. Think of it as kind of the Costco approach, the Sam's approach, something of that nature. Now, those 4 vendors, Microsoft's one of those 4. And what they're doing, in essence, is the toilet paper is x86 server capacity in the planet. That's where the game starts to change, because when they can buy that entire pallet full of toilet paper, and they can sell it now for a third, or whatever it would have to be, to which you could buy it because you can't buy it in the bulk. That is how I'm seeing this entire thing beginning to play out. That's why these massive data centers, that's why this whole shift and the rest. And as they start to do this, it is going to become far more cost effective. It is already reaching the point that it is now becoming cost effective to actually put this up in the cloud versus running it locally. And again, don't shoot the messenger on it. Again, I like the on-premise data centers, and I can give you point counterpoint for the other part of it, but this is definitely going to be relevant. All right, so Microsoft and monitoring. First off is, let me show you kind of look and feel how this works, all right? On this side over here, I've got monitoring in Azure. Let me get a quick poll here. How many people have logged into the Azure portal? I was going to say, Sean hasn't, I'm going to screen. Okay. All right, so there's at least a few of y'all. So this may be your first time seeing some of this, all right? So this side over here is showing an example of a server that's running an IaaS that's up in Azure right now, all right? And because this is a small group and I can actually tell the funny stories that I couldn't tell under recordings in other cases, what this server actually is my son's Minecraft server, because he was the #1 user of gear at my house other than me. It was becoming very expensive to run his gear, so instead now Microsoft's running his Minecraft server for me, which is real cool.
And you're monitoring.
Yes, and I'm monitoring it through their portal. Cool. Actually, I'm monitoring through Ops 2. You're right on that one also. But if you notice what we've got here, we're looking at what is our CPU percentage, disk read and write paths, network in, network out, the standard KPIs that we would expect associated with a server. Okay? So this is all built into the portal. You log in, you take a look at it, you can see exactly what's going on with it. Hey, here's what we've got. Here's what our stats look like. Okay? So that's pretty cool. Now, that also applies, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but that also applies for every other type of thing that you could be running up in the cloud. Now, the other side, I had to at least come up with something at least a little bit pretty. So the one on the other side is Operations Manager 2012 with the new dashboarding capabilities. It's actually using a free dashboard pack that the Windows Server team released, or no, the Operations Manager team released, which gives you dashboarding monitoring over your servers in Operations Manager. So what I've got here as an example, CPU utilization, memory utilization, disk utilization, and network utilization. So same concept, same server, same specs even, different locations. So it is a slightly different experience. So we're going to go a little bit more in depth on monitoring in Azure and what you're seeing here. So what you see will vary depending upon what you've got up in Azure at any one point in time. So on this side over here that I've got right now, I'm running a web role. Okay? So this web role could be a single server, multiple servers. It can scale out and scale back down depending on what I'm looking for. And I can see associated with that, what's the CPU overhead with that. It's the only metric that I get on that one at this point in time. On the other side of it, I've got a database. This is my DB02, and it shows deadlocks, failed connections, and successful connections. So there's some metrics associated with these. It depends on what you've actually got. So that DB02 is what we'll talk about with the SQL Azure pieces. So you can put databases up in Azure, and you can run them up there. And you can also split these. So as an example, we ran, during one of our tests, we took and we put up a web server and the domain controller that we put in our separate AD site that I mentioned before. We put an application up there, and we left the database on premise, and we hybrid split that. So in essence, the web stuff's running out here, but it was doing the SQL calls across the web to our localized data center. It works. It was fine, as long as we got a good enough connection and low enough latency associated with it. We could also take that same map, and we could push it up into SQL Azure and let SQL Azure do the work for us on the database pieces. As a side point, and as an important point strategically for where this is at, I wanted to point out something called endpoint monitoring, which is built into Windows Azure. So what we've got here right now is a series of different tests that were being executed on it. You can see on the other side, hey, here's the response times associated with these various disparate data sources that are out there, these different centers. So I, as an example, have a Windows-based Azure application. It's a website in this case. I'm using Azure itself and endpoints within Azure to be able to validate the response times on it. Right? So now Chicago and other locations are telling me how fast or how slow that website is, right? Here's where it starts getting really interesting and where the politics starts to line up the dominoes of why I think this is so important. This group here also wrote a function called GSM, Global Service Monitoring. So behind the scenes, what you've got is what used to be the System Center team developing System Center functionality, now writing Azure functionality. That's potentially a whole shift of something that we haven't seen before. I have heard stats, and maybe the Microsoft guys will comment or decline accordingly, but I've heard that more than half of the coders that work at Microsoft are actively working on Azure projects at this point in time. So that's a nod. I like that. All right, so I'm not too far off on that one. Can I also get a confirmation that you guys bought more than like 15% of all the server capacity? Because I'd also heard that one.
I'm not sure.
Okay, all right. I like to confirm on the first. That's good.
What Dell purchase?
Oh yeah, and there's the Dell purchase on the list there as well, which also could be one big domino to think about. Let's say for a minute, going back to my toilet paper analogy, for the guy who just walked in, he has absolutely no idea what I'm talking with the toilet paper. He'll get this eventually. So now, in essence, they're buying the biggest, or one of the biggest toilet paper manufacturers that are out there. There may be 3 or 4 in this case, as you all know, but they're buying one of them, or potentially buying one of them. All right, so what about monitoring in Operations Manager? All right, as most of y'all know, I live and breathe Operations Manager. It's all I've done now for so long, it's almost ridiculous. I have absolutely no other usable skills, as any of my coworkers can tell you. Unless it's an Ops Manager, you're just kind of like, and you should see poor Sean trying to explain to me the concept of actually how to create an account in Office 365. It's like he was teaching a 2-year-old going, click here. But Operations Manager does give us some really good functionality in terms of insights of what's going on within Azure. Because it doesn't matter what the application is, where the application is, and the rest of it. You still have to know what it's doing. You have to know if it's up and down. You have to know how it's performing, how it's responding, and the rest of it. And I'll tell you flat out, because the behind the scenes on this one, the only one that existed until a couple of months ago was the first one. There was one management pack available that did rudimentary monitoring associated with Azure cloud-based applications. And I'm sure there were plenty of other people that explained this to Microsoft, but I told the people who were responsible for management pack development at Microsoft is monitoring for Azure is not an option. It is an absolute requirement. There is nothing higher priority than getting Azure monitoring going. If that's the strategic direction for the company, if we can't monitor it, we can't use it. So I'm glad to say I don't know if they took me seriously or if I just happened to actually be pointing in the direction they're already going, but they actually made some progress. The second one is around SQL Azure. All right, to tell you how tough this one was as an example, the only possible way that you could find out how your Azure stuff was performing other than logging into the portal and looking at it was to actually do a SQL synthetic transaction and do an OLADB query to validate, is it responding, the rest. So we could use that built-in transaction. So that's not going to give us a whole lot, but at least it gave us a little something. So now they have a SQL Azure Management Pack. And the big one that's going to go, these are tying back to the buckets that I mentioned before. This is going to tie together a lot of the different pieces. They have a new thing called the Fabric monitoring, which is in preview state now. So we're going to take a look at these and what they look like. So I mentioned the first one. So the Azure Applications Management Pack. It monitors your cloud-based services, all right? And I'll make sure there's a copy of the deck available afterwards so people don't have to like write down URLs or anything. But it's just monitoring the services or associated with the cloud. So to be able to do this, and I've got a blog post series that I went through. I did a whole 15-part blog series on Azure, how to create your own application and push it up to Azure, how do you monitor it, all that type of stuff. So this was the second time that I've done this. So now it's my Azure App 02, which is up there at this point in time. And I'll tell you, just if you happen to go through this, because I don't think I got a screenshot of this, you can put certs on a website, but the certs on the website are not the certs that you use to actually monitor it with. You actually have to go into the settings associated with the entire Azure subscription. You add a cert there. Because I spent an entire day trying to figure out why my certs wouldn't work. And I finally walked away from it, came back the next day, I took one look at it, and I'm like, that's a website, okay, there's nothing in certs. And I was like, oh, I should probably put up a cert. So, needless to say, the cert's an important piece of this as well. But what we can see here is it up, is it down? What type of response times are we getting? Is it doing what it needs to be doing? Those types of things. So the company that I mentioned before that's running the application in a remote data center, we're using this actively to monitor their environment right now. It does tie directly into the Operations Manager framework. If you see on the side over there, that's a snippet from a distributed application. So it shows the different pieces. If I had multiple different web roles associated with this, so if it was going to scale from 1 to 4 servers, you'd see the multiple disparate servers associated with it at the bottom. All right, second big piece, the SQL Azure Management Pack. So this tells you a lot of good metrics, as you can see. Right now I'm highlighted on the performance data section here. There's dozens of metrics associated with what it's gathering out of it. So it's going to tell me not only things like the locking and the rest that I can see directly in the SQL Azure portal, but I can also get a whole lot more statistics that I can't get anywhere else. So this one is an example of showing me the performance data associated with, I think it was the session count, so who's connected to it at any one point in time. And again, it builds direct into the Operations Manager framework, so you can see the distributed application on the side. Here's the SQL database. And all I did was just connect it up. I didn't tell it anything was up there because I created DB2 and then found DB2 and then it populated in my stuff here just as you see. All right, the third one, and the one that I'm excited about to see when they get this finished, because it is only preview at this point in time, is what they're calling their Fabric Management Pack. Okay, so the Fabric Management Pack is closing the gaps on all these new things that I mentioned. Azure keeps changing on a daily basis. They add new features, new functions, and the rest of it. Well, now we can monitor cloud services, storage, and virtual machines, all within this new management pack. Because what I've had up to that point in time is, if I put a virtual up there, the only thing I can see is that one, those 4 KPIs that I get. Now I can get a lot more data potentially by actually being able to see the health state associated with it in here. So I'm showing here discovered storage as well. This is another one that's been a big question, which is if I bring up virtuals and I'm running them, what storage are they on, where are they located at, all that type of stuff. There's been no tie back to actually show how that works until now. So on the far side, I took a screenshot of all the different views. So you can see all the different types of stuff that they're going to be going through, so virtual machines, all your different roles that are out there. I couldn't even get enough screenshots or enough screen real estate to show all the new stuff that they're putting in this pack. So my expectation is, and this is nothing even MVP, but my personal guess, this one will probably replace the first management pack. And the reason why I say that is they use the exact same name for the folder structure, you see where it says Windows Azure. The first management pack that I showed as well has a Windows Azure folder, which as an administrator, by the way, really annoying because I added all the packs at once and I couldn't figure out which was what. Great. Delete everything, put them back in one at a time. And that's actually, I'm doing a 3-part blog series that'll go through each one of these packs, screenshots, details, everything that I found associated with them, probably in about 2 weeks. So, all right. A couple other things here. We can also, like I said, we can monitor the virtual machines and we can monitor subscriptions. So I can see down here, if I have multiple different Azure subscriptions, I can see them all down in this area. So as an example, Catapult has a lot of different Azure subscriptions. We can easily see that they're connected, that they work, and all that type of stuff. And again, showing on the side over there, the virtual machines, you can get the chuckle out of this right now. Notice the virtual machines here. So we've got the Web 1 enroll. So in essence, it was smart enough to realize I scaled out a web server. It knows there's a virtual associated with that, so I get the health of the virtual. So if I had spun that up to 4 different virtuals, I'd have 4 different virtuals show up here. And above that, that Gmod Guy 3, that's my son's Minecraft server. So all full transparency here. Yeah, it's healthy at the moment, which is good.
He wasn't playing at the time when you were up.
Yeah, the numbers, yeah, I should have them online, push this thing through. One other one, because this just got announced last week, maybe this week. I think it was this week. Yeah, this week. TechEd EMEA, by the way. So TechEd, they announced all sorts of stuff. TechEd EMEA, they announced a whole lot of stuff, and they released a whole lot of stuff. So if you didn't catch it this week, they released Windows Server 2012 R2 preview release. They released SQL 2014, if I remember correctly. In addition to that, System Center 2012 R2 preview release as well. So all of those came at the same time. With all of that hitting at the same time, this one slipped almost on everybody's radar screen because it just kind of just went there. It's just a little bit in piece, but I wanted to call it out because it's going to be very interesting.
Windows 8.1 as well.
Yeah. Oh yes, Windows 8.1 this week also. It's got a cool start button. I like it. So.
It's a square now. It's not like
Yes, it is. Oh, it is a square. The start square. Oh, somebody write that down for me. I'm going to quote that. The start square. That's good. Yeah, Windows 8.1, another big one. This pack that they released, the first thing I started thinking is this is a management pack. It's not a management pack. Okay? So what it appears to be, and I have not been able to install it yet, nor has anybody that I know successfully installed it. I've seen some MVP threads back and forth with people complaining about where they got stuck so far. But what it appears to be is that this runs on top of Windows Server 2012 R2, System Center 2012 R2, and it appears to be an on-premise version of the Azure portal. Okay, let that sink in for a second and what that would mean. This is now the gateway drug to Windows Azure. Because if you can take this portal, connect it into your private cloud environment, and do everything that you were doing or could do up in Azure in a public cloud environment, the terminology is the same, the process is the same, the look and feel is the same. So then the question becomes, once you've gotten used to this, hey, why are we spending more to do it here than to do it out here?
So connector API.
I'm not exactly sure what it's going to be yet. This is one I hope to tear apart. I'm really, really hopeful that somebody else in the MVP community will beat me to it because this thing looks really big. So Chris doesn't look that excited, so I don't think he's going to tag this
I'm
one.
going to the lake for a week, so hey.
Good for you, man. All right, so let's shift gears for a minute. So what I've been talking about up to that point in time is all applications that are running up in the cloud and occasional virtual, what can we see? And I know I'm running over on time, so if I go too far, Nick start waving me, let me know. I'll get moving here. You can put your IaaS systems up in the cloud and then use your existing on-premise monitoring environment to monitor those servers. So that domain controller that I put out there in Azure, that web server that I put out there in Azure, all right, this is a screenshot showing the Catapult domain structure, each of our different sites. If you notice, our Azure corporate location actually has a server associated with it, so it pre-built directly into the Active Directory topology work, just like it's supposed to. That's pretty cool. Top right, core operating system metrics. I get the same KPIs that I get as if it's sitting here on-prem, but it's coming in from the cloud. And my personal favorite, APM, Application Performance Monitoring, deep dive .NET diagnostics. I actually pushed a .NET application out there, and I got server exception faults and all the rest of it. All the same stuff that I can get out of Ops Manager on-premise, I can get from those same applications that are running in the Azure Cloud and Infrastructure as a Service, as long as I put an Ops Manager agent on it and import it into our systems. All right, futures. This is, believe it or not, my last slide. And we'll go to Q&A and we'll go to demo if anybody wants to see anything, because I know I'm running late on time here. But I'm absolutely serious about this. I believe, in all truthfulness, that Azure is the key Microsoft strategic direction. That they're really putting all the chips on the table on this one particular bet, and it's got to win. It really, really does. Okay? Not only because they want it to win, but also because I think the entire IT industry is accepting the fact that this is a change in direction that's coming, with the exception of Mr. Grable. I know, I talked about it last night, so I'm just calling you out the card. Just calling you out, man. Sorry.
Thanks.
That's still Windows XP.
Yeah, it is.
No, it's not.
Windows 3.1. Windows Start button or Square.
There's a start button.
Okay, all right. So, but my key point, and the second key point I wanted to bring across with this is that even for those of us that live and breathe things like Ops Manager, like I said, that's really what I love. That's what I love doing in the rest of it, and that's why this has been so hard for me to accept the change in the approach and the rest of it. But what I'm taking away as the golden nugget out of this is it doesn't matter where it's running. It really matters what we have to do because we have that app. We still have to monitor it. It's still going to have to be patched in some capacity. We're still going to have to back the dang thing up. All these types of things that we dealt with, it doesn't matter whether it's here, whether it's out there and the rest of it. So monitoring as a concept will always exist. We have to know what's going on. So, question, please.
Oh, sorry, question that I got there from.
Or comment, yes.
One thing on LinkedIn, I read an article, linked to another article called IT's Little Dirty Secret. And one of the things that it said, talked about, one of the things that the business looks at IT and see that IT has too many manual processes, not enough automated processes. And, we're doing a server, we're still going through digital servers. Well, if you're an SEC, I'm working on that. But I've been at certain places where they go and they install individual on each server. You have a lot of servers, it takes too long. Where you use the tools, right, you can do that a lot quicker. And the same thing with monitoring is that, a lot of the problems in IT can be created a lot quicker if you have the right monitoring set up.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more on that. I think that we, as an IT administrators, and what we do on a daily basis, we're going to have tools to be able to do the types of things that we have to be able to do them more effective. I have yet to find the organization that's overstaffed, too many people sitting around playing, Minecraft or whatever the heck it is. Yeah, I haven't found them yet. So what I'm seeing is we're going to be continually pressured to do more with less, to use whatever we can to automate, to be more effective on a daily basis. I think you're absolutely correct on that. I think automation is a key to it. So I think with Microsoft's orchestrator pieces and the rest of it, I think they're beginning to show their level of interest in that. And here's where I will intentionally be as vague as I can, saying as much as I can without saying anything that's going to get me in trouble or get me booted. So orchestration as a concept, I have every reason to believe is going to evolve as well. And I'm going to go there. If you're thinking about where it goes, it may not go here anymore. It may go up there. So, personal opinion, nothing to back it with other than a lot of years doing this stuff. All right, call to action, additional reference, and the rest of it. If you have an MSDN subscription, anybody happens to have an MSDN subscription, you already have Azure. You just need to activate it. There is a free trial also, so you can try it out, check it out, and the rest of it. Or check out the System Center 2012 R2 preview stuff that's out there right now. Our guys have already there were active contests going from the minute that this thing released. Greg Tate in Austin was the first one to have a 2012 R2 server up and running with screenshots and showing us what was going on. It's like, dang, he beat us to that. So I got Ops Manager running first on server 2012 R2 preview. So there's others that are doing Orchestrator. But there's some good stuff out there. Since I know I'm basically out of time, but I'll point out a couple of updates that you'll see coming in the R2 release for Ops Manager. The big one is System Center Advisor integration. So there's now a connector that allows you to be able to integrate your System Center Advisor if you have that. And the second is going to be significant advancements within the Unix and Linux capabilities of Operations Manager. And again, intentionally as vague as I can get away with without still getting myself in trouble. All right. So at this point, I need Nick to make the call in terms of where we're at from a timing perspective. If you guys have anything you want to see, all the screenshots that you saw here, everything that I went through and the rest of it, these are all out of my lab. So everything is up, it is running. There's no Microsoft pain in this other than me pulling out my subscription IDs. So if you guys see, if there's anything you want to see how it works, let me know.
I think you're good to roll.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
we'll-
up to you, it's up to you.
when we get the pizza in, we'll just let this whole session keep on rolling while we're eating and everything else, if that's all right.
Sean, you say.
And the pizza said they'd be here between 4 and 4:15.
Okay.
Okay. So then the question becomes, because this is actually, believe it or not, my last slide. So the question is there anything you guys want to see? Is there any piece of this I've got access to, not only all the stuff that I talked about with Azure, the Azure portal pieces and the rest of it, the monitoring capabilities with it. I've also got Operations Manager 2012 R2 preview that's out there, Windows Server 2012 R2 preview. So throw it out. Is there anything anybody wants to see?
No.
All right. And I say we get Sean up.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Sean next, right?
Something.
All right, thank you.